Shalom Aleichem. We continue in Hilchot Talmud Torah, the Rabbeinu Rambam, Zichrono Livracha, Perek Shvi'i Halacha Aleph, beginning of chapter 7. I'm going to share the screen with you over here now. Chacham Zaken B'Chokhmah. In other words, a serious Chacham B'Torah. Not your average yeshiva bocha, but a serious Chacham B'Torah. V'chen Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin of the Bet Din HaGadol, or Av Bet Din, or the second, his deputy, Shesarah. In other words, it has become known that he has sinned in a significant way. En menadim ortho b'parhesia le'olam. And because of this fact, he needs to be excommunicated. It is the correct response is to excommunicate this person and remove him from his position, as we're about to see. But this is not done by parhesia in public, in a manner that the public will know about this, or we don't have to go out of our way to make it known. Why? Because of the Hilul Hashem involved. Unless we're talking about someone who sinned so egregiously and caused Am Yisrael to sin in such a manner, such as Yerovam, who caused Am Yisrael to, on a massive scale, to sin, Binyanei Avodah Zarah. Unless we're talking about something like that, then it's done quietly. However, if we're talking about other types of sin, not something like Yerovam ben Nevat, Malkinotho b'sin'ah. If he's Hayav Malkuyoth, then he is to be given Malkuyoth b'sin'ah. Again, without publicizing it. Shneimar v'chashalta yom v'chashal gam novi imlecha laila. In other words, this pasuk is Nidrash, is explained, Afal pi shekashal, kasel kalayla. In other words, not everything has to be brought, certainly not in such a case where it involves Hilul Hashem, and that's an important consideration, obviously. Not everything has to be on in the newspapers tomorrow morning. This concept of what's called in Hebrew, Zechut HaSibur Lada'at, the right of the public to know, which is often nothing to do with the public, but the right of journalists to self-aggrandize and to publish a scoop before somebody else, because that's how they make their living, very often by publishing Lashon Hara and other hateful things. There is no such zechut according to the Torah. The entire world of media would have to be reformed according to the Torah. What we have today, of course, is not just unsatisfactory, it's a total and utter shambles and more than an embarrassment. And it sets the tone, unfortunately. Excuse me, it sets the tone for an entire society and on the wrong footing, completely on the wrong footing. And people concentrate and talk about all kinds of irrelevancies and etc. Now, certain things do need to be known, but this kind of thing, let's say there was a great Chacham, and it's unfortunately the case, it became known that he was involved in some kind of sexual impropriety. That's a terrible thing, and he needs to be punished, and he needs to be excommunicated. True, but it doesn't have to be on the front page of the newspaper. It doesn't have to be in the news the next morning. And Hilul Hashem is sufficient, more than sufficient, consideration to override all such all other considerations. So if he needs to be punished by way of a flogging or something like that, this is done. It's not the case that because he's a Chacham Gadol, he's patur, he's exempt from punishment, as somebody else would be. That's not true. He is to be punished. And then what happens after that? And now go and stay at home. In other words, it's not house arrest, but show yourself as little as possible in public and disappear, at least for a good period of time. And by doing so, he's actually protecting his own reputation and honor by keeping a low profile and keeping the matter more or less under wraps. And this, by the way, I assume this is probably why in various communities, when certain very unsavory and very regrettable and terrible things happened or occurred in various Jewish communities, it goes without saying that whatever these things may be, whatever improprieties took place, they take place in other sectors of society, of human society, at a rate of probably 10,000 to 1. But that doesn't mean that they cannot occur, and they do occur for various reasons. This is probably why in some communities they choose to try and deal with these things quietly and not make it public knowledge, etc. And that is correct. The overriding consideration should not be whether this person who claims they were wronged, and very likely they were wronged, well, that also has to be investigated because it's not always the case. It's the easiest thing nowadays to claim that so-and-so did something, and now you go and prove that he didn't do it. That's, as the expression goes in Hebrew, prove that you don't have a sister. In other words, if someone wants to ruin your reputation, all you have to do is start whispering into people's ears, he has a sister who's a prostitute. Forgive me, but that's the expression. So, and he hasn't even got a sister, but people wish to besmirch him. So the rumor was spread that his sister is a prostitute or a woman of loose morals or something of that type, which then somehow reflects upon him, even though he hasn't got a sister. How is he going to prove he has no sister? That's the expression. So, and the idea is clear. It's very easy to accuse, but that's not enough. That also is true. That has to be considered. But the hashash of Hilul Hashem, if the people involved are somehow representative of the Torah or the Torah community, that is a very serious consideration, and that overrides other considerations, such as a certain person feeling that they're able to avenge themselves or something like that. The person, this particular person's desire for revenge, etc., is not the overriding paramount concern. That doesn't mean that if compensation or something like that is in order, that shouldn't be arranged. But again, it can be done without polluting the public space. In general, such things, which the media likes to focus on for obvious reasons, because it sells newspapers or it brings them more advertising revenue. We should not be collaborating with such motivations and with such practices. So the next halacha states as follows: halacha beth. So here we're not talking about a great chacham, as we spoke about a moment before, because that person, the nasi or the av beth din or chacham zaken b'chokhmah, these people are obviously immediately and directly associated with the Torah, They represent the Torah, and something terrible has happened here. So we try and deal with it as best we can, and we try and keep it out of the public eye. And that's also for the good of the public. It does no good for the public to know that such a thing took place. How exactly does it help society? How does it help people? It only turns this into a topic for gossip and conversation, and it only will lead to Hilul Hashem and to a general lowering of the social, of the public debate in the public square. Now we're talking about this next halacha, Kol Tamid Hachamim Shnithayev Niduy. Here we're talking about any serious student of Torah. It doesn't have to be a famous Rav. It can be a person who's been studying in yeshiva for 3 years. Asur levet din likpos ulenadotho bimhera. Even if it becomes known to the Bet Din that something untoward has occurred with this person, they don't have to be in a rush to put him into nidui, to excommunicate him. Ela borahim midavar zeh. In fact, they try and avoid the whole thing if possible. Unishmatim mimeno. Here it's not a matter of, again, if the person needs to be punished, he will be punished. We're talking not about punishment, about malkuyoth, about a flogging. We're talking about excommunication. If some kind of fine or other compensation needs to be imposed, that will be done. Here we're talking about nidui, about excommunication. When nishmatim mimenu, they try and sidestep the whole thing. وحسدي حكمim היו משתבחים. وحسدي حكمim היו משתבחים שלא נמנו מעולם לנדות תמיד חכמים. And we find in Chazal statements to the effect that I never took part, in the niduya of the Tamid Chachamim. Af'al pi, in other words, it's not something to be in any kind of a hurry to do. Af'al pi shenimnim lahal kotho in mithayev malkuth, as we said, even though he may require malkuyoth, and that is to be done. But the niduya is an extra step, as a more serious matter. Wa'afilu makath maduth nimnim aleha lahakotho. And even if we're talking about makath maduth, which is not min haTorah but min divrei soferim, if necessary, this is done. If that's what the Beit Din considers necessary, it is to be done. Okay. V'chesad hu hanidui, halacha gimel or beth. V'chesad hu hanidui. How is this done? Omerim, the Beit Din says, peloni b'shamta. Usually this is not done in the person's presence. So they say so-and-so b'shamta. The word shamta is the Arabic word, the Aramaic word for nidui, for excommunication. It really means basically arur, cursed, as we're about to see. Ve'im niduhu b'fano, and if he was present, Omerim, they say peloni zeh. They say this person here before us is now to be in nidui, is to be excommunicated. And if we're talking about even a more serious level of excommunication called herem, Omerim peloni mahram. So-and-so is now mahram, is in a state of herem. Arur, and they also can use the term arur. Bo ala, bo shevu'a, bo nidui. So these are the terms used by the Beit Din when announcing such a thing. And this, of course, means that all people within the jurisdiction of that Beit Din now have to behave in a certain manner with regards to this person, and vice versa. He also has to behave in a certain way. And that's what we're about to see in a moment. But first, the Rambam says in Halacha Darad or Gimel, Kesad matirim nidui or herem. All right, so that is how the herem or the nidui is imposed. How is it undone? How is it nullified? Omerim lo sharui lach umahul lach. The Beit Din announces, it is undone, it is nullified. ואם התירוהו שלא בפניו, אומרים פלוני שרוי לו ומחול לו. The nidui is undone, and whatever was asur for him and others to do before is now mutar, is now permissible. And how does this work exactly? That's what Rambam now discusses. Halakha Hey or Dalid. מה הוא המנהג שינהו המנודה בעצמו ושנוהגים עמו? How exactly is the menudeh, the excommunicated person, to conduct himself, and how are others to conduct themselves vis-a-vis this person? menudeh asur l'saper ולכבס כאבל כל ימי נידויו. The menudeh is not allowed to cut his, to get a haircut, to trim his hair, to trim his beard, or lechabes, and to wash clothes or wear washed, laundered clothing. Ka'aver, like a person in mourning, as long as he's in nidui. Wa'emez zamanim alo, and he is not to be included in a zimun, if it happened that others ate with him. Nor can he be counted for any minyan, anything that requires 10 people. And people may not sit within arba amoth, 2 meters of this person. So they physically have to keep their distance from him. On the other hand, he is a chacham still, but Torah, he may have sinned, and probably will be doing teshuvah, more almost certainly. But in the meantime, he's able to teach Torah. He knows Torah that others do not know, and he can give this over. Aval shonehu la'achirim, v'shonim lo, and he is also able to hear Torah from others. V'niskar v'socher, and he is able to hire himself out for a certain purpose, to make a living. V'socher, and he's also allowed to hire someone to do some work for him. Ve'im meth beniduyo, and if he died in this state of nidui, Beth din sholahim umanihim even al arono. The Beit Din sends a shaliach, someone in their name, to place a stone on his coffin. Kolomar shehem rogamim otho, which is as if to say, we are stoning his coffin. This person died in a state of nidui, and that is a terrible thing, and it's not to be taken lightly. Because he has been separated from the tzibur. In other words, for a Jew to be cut off from his fellow Jews in his area, or in general, it may be a nidui, which, as we saw in the last perek, applies to every Jew in the world in certain cases. That's a terrible fate, a terrible thing. And if he dies, he is not to be eulogized, nor is there a lewaya, in other words, the normal burial practices, including people coming to the cemetery, etc., are not to be done. So the person is buried, as it were, quietly, without any ceremony, without any discussion. Halakha he or wow yather alo ha-muhram. Beyond this, in other words, a higher level, a more serious type of nidui is called herem. In which way is it different? She'eno shoneh la'acherim. He cannot teach Torah to anybody. Wa'en shonim lo, and no one can teach him Torah. Aval shonehu la'asmo, kedeh shelo yishkach talmudo. He is allowed to study with himself, and review what he has studied, so he will not forget. وإنه نسكار وإن نسكارم له. He may not hire himself out, nor may he hire someone to do anything for him. So let's just say he wants someone, he needs his house to be painted. Well, no one can do this for him right now. And no one can do any kind of business or commerce with him. And he's in general to be ignored and not dealt with in any way beyond the minimum that might be required in order for his survival. In other words, somehow people can organize, or he can organize that people bring to his home food or something, things of this nature, but nothing beyond that. This is obviously extremely serious. It occurs to me to point out that so-called policies of lockdown were a kind of herem. If you think about it, it's pretty much the same thing, which should indicate to you how serious a crime against humanity lockdown policies were. Beyond the fact that there never was and never will be any medical basis for such decrees. There was never any proof of this. The opposite has been demonstrated by all serious experts over the last few years. But beyond that fact that it was of no value, medically speaking, and quite the opposite, it caused these measures alone, so-called lockdown, which was a term that was unheard of in normal civil society. It was a term that belonged only in the prison system, the term lockdown. That such a policy, such a practice is destructive of human life altogether, physically, psychologically, young people, old people, more particularly than people who are neither young nor old. This is a point to be noted.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The language of the Rambam in this halakha is a little bit strange when he says that he's only allowed to learn Torah so he doesn't forget what he's already learned. Are we supposed to infer from that he's not allowed to learn anything new?
It's a good point. It's not clear to me, frankly, whether that's what Rambam intended, but it's not impossible that your question, which leads to that conclusion, is correct. It's similar to the opinion that on Tisha B'Av, there is the opinion that you can study Torah, but only things that you have already studied, and not new material, because that's your thermos sameach. That is a greater reason for rejoicing or for simcha, for happiness, and for satisfaction. Learning something new in the Torah is more mesameach than learning something or reviewing that which you have already studied. So there is such an opinion with regards to Hilchot, with regards to Tisha B'Av. And it might be the case, though the Rambam doesn't really elaborate enough to make it very clear, it might be the case that this also applies here. Even even though that's not the usual halakha with regards to Tisha B'Av. In other words, on Tisha B'Av, Limud Torah in general is asur, not just that which is new. Okay, the next halakha states, halakha Zayin, or well, מי שישב בנידויו 30 יום, ולא ביקש להתירו, if a person was put into nidui, excommunicated by the Beth Din, and does not turn to the Beth Din and request that they nullify their decree against him. Menadim otho sheniya. In other words, this is a sanction. It's designed to force him to recant, to repent, to do whatever is necessary that he does. And if it doesn't work the first time, then it's done again. Menadim otho sheniya. Yashav shaloshim yom achirim. V'lo bikesh lahatiro. And if he did not recant or do teshuvah, if you recall, for example, some of the examples we saw at the end of the last perek, and we saw that a number of them have to do with shohet or a butcher selling meat that is not kasher or that wasn't. We're not sure how it was exactly done. He doesn't check his knife before the local chacham, etc. So if he doesn't, if in such a case, let's say a person was put into nidui for these reasons, well, he has to come before the Beit Din or notify the Beit Din that he admits that what he did was wrong and he knows it and accepts responsibility. If compensation or something of that type is in order, then he does what is required and announces that he will never do such a thing again, etc. If this doesn't happen, then they place him in nidui a second time. And if that doesn't help, then he's put in harem, which is even the more serious form of excommunication that we mentioned. And again, a normal human being will not. It's hard to imagine a normal human being choosing that state of existence. Just as it's very difficult to understand how millions and billions of people accepted the criminal policies associated with COVID. Bechama matirim hanidui or acherim. What is required? What kind of forum is required in the Beit Din to undo acherim or nidui? Bishalosha afilo hedyototh. In other words, they don't have to be great chachamim, but they have to be reasonable people who understand what's going on and why this person was placed in nidui in the first place. So if the Beit Din tells them, we appoint you 3 people to discuss it, and if you think it should be undone, then go ahead and do so. That's also okay. Uyahid mumhe matir hanidui levado. If we're talking about a chacham, a gadol who's a mumhe, then he can do this alone. Similar to certain halachot with regards to dinei mamonot, hoshen mishpat, that in some cases a mumhe yahid can decide many matters by himself without the need for others. And in other situations, shlosha hedyotot, 3 more common people who have some understanding. Nevertheless, they have to be obviously Yisraelim kasherim. They have to be proper and upstanding Jews who understand what's going on and what's being discussed. That's all. That in many cases, that's also possible in other types of matters as well. ויש לתלמיד להתיר הנידוי או החרם אפילו במקום הרב. And let's say a certain well-known Rav placed so-and-so in nidui, he can instruct his talmid to convene a forum and to undo this nidui. Halacha Taif, Rambam says, Shelosha shenidu v'halechu lahem. There was a Beit Din of 3 that imposed the nidui on a certain person, and these 3 people are no longer with us. They may have traveled, they may have died, they're no longer present. And this person who was excommunicated has now done teshuvah. 3 other chachamim, or as we said, even hedyototh can convene themselves and undo it. Not against the will of the Beit Din, but with the permission of and the agreement of the Beit Din. If a person knows that he was excommunicated, but he doesn't know who did so, who was behind this, then he may turn to the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, because this person is the head of all the Chachamim, and he can undo the Nidui. Nidui al Tanai, says Rambam, the next halacha. Afilu mipi asmo sarich hafara. Sometimes the Nidui is said stated in such a way that it is conditional. It may even be something which shouldn't have been said in the first place. But if, let's say, a person said about himself, if tomorrow it does not rain, then I will be in Nidui. A person might say such a strange thing when people are claiming that he did something terrible and he should be excommunicated, and he says, I shouldn't, but I'll tell you what, I will make this bet with you, as it were. I will say as follows: if it doesn't rain tomorrow, then I will be in Nidui. This has to be undone, even so. In other words, it doesn't have to be others who do it. You can do it to yourself. תמיד חכמים שנידע עצמו, ואפילו נידע עצמו על דעת פלוני, ואפילו על דבר שחייב עליו נידוי, הרי זה מפר לעצמו. תמיד חכמים, and this might be the case, that the Tamid Chachamim sinned in some way, and he knows other people may not know, he knows that he sinned in some way, and he wishes to do teshuvah, and he places himself in nidui as a kind of teshuvat mishkal, as a kind of penance. And even if he did so, al da'ath ploneh, in other words, he said, I'm doing this on the understanding that this chacham, this particular person, if he's informed of the matter, he agrees that I should be placing myself in nidui for what I did. Even though it's something that required nidui, it was not done frivolously. He also may undo it. If he was the one who instigated the nidui in the first place, he also may nullify it.
Rabbi,
yes.
For these kinds of Tanaim, does it need to be formulated in the way that it needs to be for Kiddushin, for example?
Go on.
Where you need to repeat it, the positive statement and then the negative statement.
In other words, a bi-directional Tanai? No, I don't believe so. I don't think that's necessary in this case. Okay, Rambam continues. Misheni niduhu b'halom. If a person had a dream, and in this dream he saw himself being excommunicated. Afilu yada' minidahu tzarich 10 ben adam sheshonim halachot lahatiro miniduyo. So this was not actually nidui. It took place in a dream. It didn't happen in the real world. But even though most of the dreams that most people experience are nonsense and empty and frivolous, nevertheless, not all dreams are so. Sometimes, precisely because a person's dreams can reflect his own thoughts on various things, a person may know that he did something wrong. Maybe no one else is aware of this fact, but he is aware. And he even thinks perhaps I would be worthy of being put in such a state of nidui. And he dreams about this. Frequently, this will not be an empty, meaningless dream. In other words, sometimes a person's conscience speaks to him through his dreams. And I think many people would admit to this fact, that sometimes a dream has more than a grain of truth to it. something perhaps that a person knows but did not wish to admit to themselves, or something which is, they have a good feeling, a hunch, an intuition that this is how it is, or this is how it should be, even though it's not 100% obvious or plain, but they very much suspect that they would be worthy of being put in nidui for this or that reason. That is frequently the reason for such a dream, because the fact is most people do not dream. In the middle of the night, they simply dream up a situation where they're being they're being excommunicated by a Beit Din. This is not something that most people would tell you that they dream about all the time. It's simply not. So there's something that needs to be looked at here. So to whom does he go? Normally, you need to go to the Beit Din that imposed the nidui in order to undo it. But here there is no Beit Din. So to whom do you turn? Sarich asara b'nei adam sheshonim halachoth lahatiro miniduyo. He needs to gather together 10 people, a minyan of people, sheshonim halachoth. Simple meaning of this term, lishnot halachoth, is people who study and learn Mishnayot ba'al peh. Halachoth refers to Mishnayot. Sarich asara b'nei adam sheshonim halachoth lahatiro miniduyo. That is also the meaning of the famous statement, Kol hashoneh halachoth muftach lo shehu ben olam haba. That's what it's referring to. You see the importance and the pride of place in the Torah world of knowing halakha, studying halakha, because Mishnayot, halachoth, because technically the real term is for the entire body of the Mishnah, that's the HaMishnah. But then you have Siddharim, you have the orders within the Mishnah, the 6 orders, you have the Masechtot, and you have the Parakim, and each particular statement is called the halakha. And that's why you find in the Talmud Yerushalmi, we say, such and such is written in Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Eruvin, Perek Aleph, Halakha Aleph. The word halakha refers to that specific Mishnah. So the term Mishnah is generally used incorrectly, imprecisely nowadays. And because people don't know this, they also don't understand this kind of a statement here that we have in front of us here in the Rambam, or Kol hashoneh halachoth. There is a girsah b'chol yom, but the real girsah is without b'chol yom. Such people may not be the greatest chachamim, but these are people who are seriously involved in the Torah and the Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's not the same as making all kinds of durashot or banding about all manner of creative and inventive ideas and notions, many of which will often not be correct. They may sound nice, but they're not necessarily correct. But what Chachamim refer to in various places, such as in Masechet Horayot and Yerushalmi, as Ba'alei Agada, Ba'alei Halakha, or Ba'alei Halachoth, Shoneh Halachoth, is a higher level. This needs to be understood. That doesn't mean that Agada is not important. It is, but that is the level that comes properly after a proper grounding in the actual implementation and reality of the Torah and the Torah Sheba'al Peh in the world. And that comes about by studying Torah Sheba'al Peh in a serious way, and by learning the halachot, the Mishnayot, Ba'al Peh. A person, as the Maharal describes, then does not, not something you study and then you forget. It's with you wherever you go. It's part of you. So he has to have 10 such people. They don't have to be Ba'alei Hora'ah. It's not the same thing. Ba'al Hora'ah is someone who is presented with a question which the answer to which is not obvious, because if it was obvious, then many people could answer the question. And he has to have a very profound understanding of the sources and the situation, and etc. That requires a hacham b'hora'ah. Here we're talking about a lesser level. We're talking about shoneh halachot, people who study Torah on a serious level, and they take Torah seriously, because this dream this person had is essentially was a kind of a hint to this person that you need to do something. You need to mend your ways. And but where's this hint coming from? It's coming from a spiritual realm, and that realm belongs, or can be who can represent that realm, so to speak? Anshe Torah. Nowadays, many people think that if a person has various problems or issues, they turn to a psychologist. Sometimes that might be helpful, or a psychiatrist or therapist or what have you. But the fact of the matter is that the best kind of therapists, in many cases, for many issues, are the Chachmei Torah, as Rambam writes in Hilchot De'oth. Hilchot De'oth Perek Sheni. Hilchot De'oth Perek Sheni, Rambam states as follows: people suffering from a physiological malady, Holeh HaGuf, Rambam says, Tu'amim hamar mathok wa mathok mar, their sense of taste and other faculties do not function properly. We know that in some situations, some types of sickness or syndrome, people are driven to eat strange things. As Rambam says here, Yesh min hacholim mishamith aweh u'tha'ev lema'achaloth shenam ruim la'achila. Person will eat dirt, the earth, and not want to eat proper food, etc. And Rambam goes on to say, Kach b'nei adam shenafshotehem holoth. There are people, many people, whose nefesh, their soul, not their physiological being, but their spiritual being, is ill and is dysfunctional. And therefore, they are drawn to negative things. Mithawim wa'ahavim hade'oth hara'oth, v'soneim haderech hatova. And they reject and they develop a terrible antipathy towards anything which is all that is good. And they're not willing to make any effort to do the right thing. And this state of disease, spiritual disease, can be overpowering. Some people cannot overcome it. And Rambam goes on to say in Halakha Beth, Umahi takanath holeh nefashot yelechu etzel hachachamim. They need to go to the Chachamim. Who are the Chachamim? Chachmei Torah, shehem rofei nefashot. They are the healers of the soul. V'yirapeu holyam b'de'oth shemelamdim otam ad sheyachzirun laderech hatova. And they can instruct and direct a person, an educated person, to regain their spiritual health. So returning to Hilchot Talmud Torah, when a person experienced such a dream, it's very likely that there's a problem, and it's not for no reason that he dreamt such a thing. And he turns to Anshe Torah, therefore. So the lowest level of Anshe Torah that is fitting for this purpose is Asara Anshim Sheshonim Halachot. All right, so we're back in Hilchot Talmud Torah La Rambam. Let's say he couldn't find. Lo masa, didn't find easily such people, 10 such people. Torah arihim al parsa. He has to make an effort to the extent of traveling a parsa, which is arba'a mil. A mil really, I believe, is approximately almost 1.5 kilometers. So that's about 6 kilometers. So if necessary, he should take himself and travel on foot as far as 6 kilometers in order to gather together 10 such people. Lomasa, and if they're still unable to find such people, matirim lo asara sheshonim mishnah. The difference between Mishnah and Halacha is that Halachot does not. There are certain Halachot which a person could study and Shoneh and learn Ba'al Peh, but were not included in the Mishnah. So they were Baki not just in what the Mishnah mentions, but also many Halachot that the Mishnah does not mention. That's why we find this distinction between those whose knowledge is limited to the Mishnah and those whose knowledge is also, they're aware of halachot, which were basically often statements from the Tanaim, or it could be statements from the early generations of Amoraim, shall we say, in ancient times. And these were stated as halachot pesukoth. Halachot pesukoth, in other words, that you can rely on, that there's no mahloketh, and they're universally accepted, basically. Not something up for discussion. And for this reason, a person who is very knowledgeable and studies constantly the Mishneh Torah of Rambam, that's essentially the same as a person who's shoneh halachot. You could also say the same about a person who studies the Torah. You could say the same about the Shulchan Aruch. You could say the same about Piskei Harid, or many other sefarim that exist, because you could make the claim about any one of these sefarim that well, perhaps this opinion is just the opinion of the Rambam and not the opinion of Rashi. That might be. And the reverse is also true. If you study the Torah and he's posek according to opinion, not like the Rambam, well, so you studied an opinion, a different opinion, but it's also halacha pesuka, at least according to many chachamim. So a person you see that the concept of being baki b'halacha l'ma'aseh is important, which of course many of you will be familiar with the fact that this is not exactly what goes on in much of the yeshiva world today. Knowing halacha l'ma'aseh, studying Torah in such a way that it leads you to an understanding and a knowledge of halacha l'ma'aseh is largely relegated to the simple, as if it's something for simpletons to do, people who study a few minutes of Mishnah B'Rura between Mincha and Arvith. And that, of course, is completely 100% wrong. And these statements here should make it plain to any person that a knowledge of halacha l'ma'aseh is important, very important, and it is to be highly regarded. So if a person is able to be lefalpel, to discuss suqiyah and to raise different possibilities and what some people like to refer to as so and so knows how to learn. Well, knowing how to learn is one thing, but actually learning is another thing. As the Gra, it's reported in the name of the Gra, Gaon Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mivilna, Zichron Livracha, that Al-Amdan is not someone who knows how to learn. Al-Amdan is someone who actually learns a great deal. Just as in the same way as you say about so-and-so that he's a ganav, a thief, or a ganvan. A ganvan doesn't mean that he knows how to steal. It means that he does steal. So a lamdan is a person who actually studies correctly, that is to say, and not a person who knows how to study. So we'll complete this halakha and end for today. The Rambam goes on to say, so if you didn't find such people, such 10 people, Shishonim halachot, in other words, they know more than the basic Mishnah, their knowledge is more extensive, then that's Shoneh halachot, then he can make do with Asara Shishonim Mishnah. If not, that's not available where he lives. Lo masa matirim lo mishi yodaim likroth b'Torah. Those who know how to read from the Torah. What does that mean? The person, if he's called up in the Bet Knesset to read from the Torah, a number of pesukim, he actually knows how to do so. There's also a certain level of yidiyah, of knowledge, and something to be held in regard. This, of course, refers to a situation where people were called up to the Torah and actually read from the Torah, not just stood there and had it read for them by somebody else. This was something that was unknown at that time. So, matirim lo mishi yod'im likrot b'Torah. Those some people who know how to read from the Torah. It's not a very high level of Torah knowledge, but it's something. There may be amei aretz in many other respects, most other respects, but they know how to read from the Torah. And I've met many such people, many temanim. They're not great chachamim at all, but some of them, any place at all in the Torah, you ask them to read from the Torah, they just know, because it's girasadi and kutha. It's something they were taught as children, and it was repeated, and they go to shul every Shabbat and they hear it and they don't forget, and they'll read. Some of them without mistakes at all. I've seen this with my own eyes on many occasions. But you wouldn't ask such a person a question b'halacha, he would have no clue. Lo masa bimkomo asara, if they are not, such people are not to be found, matirim lo afilu shalosha. Then, in that case, even 3 hedyototh, any 3 kosher Jews were not known to be rashaim. So in other words, people who are not known to transgress the Torah. So any such people, 3 people can undo this nidui that took place in a dream. We shall stop here for today. So, hayu beruchim, hizku v'yames levavchem kol ha'meyachalin l'Adonai, shalom u'nisachon.